Anti-lockdown protesters hurled flares at police as a rally against coronavirus measures descended into violent chaos. 9 police officers were injured and 16 people were arrested during clashes that began in Trafalgar Square in central London and spilled into Hyde Park. The bottles were thrown at police and officers used batons against protesters, leaving some with visible injuries as the force broke up the rally because demonstrators weren't socially distancing. The protesters then marched to Hyde Park, where further clashes erupted and flares and other missiles were lobbed at baton-wielding officers who were wearing helmets for protection. It was the second weekend of trouble at a demonstration against pandemic restrictions. Chanting freedom and carrying banners saying "We do not consent" and COVID-19 84, thousands of protesters had crammed into Trafalgar Square on Saturday with none appearing to wear face coverings or to social distance. Several told broadcasters they believed the pandemic was a hoax created by governments to control people. The Metropolitan Police said the protest was stopped because crowds had not complied with social distancing and risked spreading coronavirus. The force said demonstrators were asked to leave and warned that anyone who stayed could be subject to enforcement action. Officers penned the crowd in Trafalgar Square and water was thrown at them by demonstrators, while crowds also chanted "Pick your side" at the officers. Police removed sound equipment from Trafalgar Square and several protesters were led away in handcuffs. Another demonstrator was physically carried away from the scene by officers. Earlier, police searched a man and confiscated a makeshift riot shield he was carrying. Scotland Yard said 16 people were arrested and 9 officers were injured. 2 of them were hospitalised to be treated for head injuries. Arrests were for a variety of offences including breaching coronavirus regulations, assaulting a police officer, public order offences and violent disorder, it added. Commander Ada Delacan said, as the crowds began to swell in Trafalgar Square, it became impossible for people to maintain social distancing and keep each other safe. Likewise, there appeared to be no efforts by organisers to engage with crowds and keep those assembling safe from transmitting the virus. This lack of action voided the risk assessment submitted by event organisers the night before. This is especially saddening in light of the injuries sustained by officers last weekend. Therefore, today's demonstration was no longer exempt from the coronavirus regulations. In the interest of public safety, officers then worked quickly to disperse crowds. However, I am very frustrated to see that 9 officers were injured during clashes with a small minority of protesters. This is especially saddening in light of the injuries sustained by officers last weekend. London Mayor Sadiq Khan stressed that large gatherings, including protests, were still banned to stop the spread of COVID-19. He added, the reckless and violent behaviour of some protesters has left hard-working police officers injured and put the safety of our city, which is at a critical moment in the fight against this virus, at risk. This is totally unacceptable. We cannot let the sacrifices Londoners have made be undermined by the selfish behaviour of a small number. Violence of this kind towards officers will not be tolerated, and perpetrators will feel the full force of the law. The protest comes a week after a separate event which saw more than a dozen officers injured when a small minority targeted police and more than 32 arrests were made. The Met said it had been engaging with organisers throughout the week to remind them of their legal obligations and explaining the events could be in breach of coronavirus regulations. While protests are exempt from the rule of 6 in England, organisers must submit a risk assessment and comply with social distancing. Prime Minister Boris Johnson tightened COVID-19 restrictions, telling people to work from home, if possible, and ordering pubs and restaurants to close early after cases started to rise again.